Support your curiosity by becoming a member of KCRW. That way you can help ensure KCRW music, news, and culture will continue to thrive and fulfill your need to know. Donate at kcrw.com/join.
Long John's has shrimp lovers talking Cajun.
Ooh-wee! This Cajun shrimp tastes like home.
Adler, you're from Milwaukee.
The tangy taste reminds me when I was living in the Delta.
Only Delta you lived in was a fraternity house.
Tender shrimps, all spicy and crunchy, don't you know?
Cut the Cajun, Adler.
Okay. It's okay by me if it's okay by you. Long John Silver.
New Cajun shrimp.
Sounds good to me.
Well, even though we're on the coast, there was a time not long ago when Long John Silver's was some of the best seafood in town. But now LA is finally turning into a seafood paradise. Well, sort of. We're going to talk about that later in the show. But first, a big fish is eating up an even bigger fish. Charter Communications agreed to buy Time Warner Cable for about $55 billion. The man behind the deal is cable king John Malone, and he's wanted Time Warner Cable for some time. For more on Malone and his expanding empire, we're joined now by David Gellis for the New York Times. Hi.
Hi, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Well, Charter Communications, not exactly a household name. How is it able to buy Time Warner Cable?
Well, that's going to change soon if John Malone has his way. He took just a minority stake in this company, which, as you said, is not terribly well known. It's a regional cable operator, mostly in the South. But John Malone, of course, is the guy that helped found this industry in the 80s and 90s. And so when he took this stake, everyone wondered what he was up to, and now we know. And they were able to do it, you ask, through debt. The capital markets are incredibly generous right now. It's very easy to borrow a lot of money, and John Malone is better at this than just about any other media executive in history.
So he has not only bought up a stake in Charter, but he also has a stake in DirecTV and a whole bunch of other cable interests. Can you describe his interests?
I was just talking to an analyst, and I said, who's the nearest analogy to John Malone? And he says there is none. He just has no peer. Through Liberty Global, he controls quite literally the largest cable television empire ever assembled, but we don't hear about it because it's in Europe. Through Liberty Media, he has full control of the Atlanta Braves baseball team, as well as the QVC and HSN home shopping networks. And through Liberty Broadband, he now has this stake in Charter, which he's parlaying into what will be veritable control of now the nation's second largest cable and broadband operator. So his hands are in a lot of pies.
Yeah. So, this comes at a time when a lot of people are cutting the cord, or they don't really look at cable as the powerhouse as it once was. What is the interest here on the part of John Malone? Obviously, he's a very savvy investor.
Just last year, Comcast agreed to acquire Time Warner Cable. That deal fell apart. The companies, when they announced that deal, marketed it as all about television. In such an interesting contrast, the Charter team is really focusing on broadband, which is, in the end, what this is all about. Because even though we may be cutting our cords, we're not cutting our cord to the Internet. We're not going to turn off that pipe. A lot of TV may be coming over the Internet, but we're still going to have to pay someone a pretty hefty bill every month to get that high-speed Internet.
Okay, so it's all about the broadband, all about Internet, not necessarily about what we're seeing on our television per se.
That's right. I mean, we're still going to consume a lot of content, but the way that people are consuming that, people are becoming a bit more agnostic, whether it comes through the TV, whether it comes over an app like Hulu or Netflix that happens to be running over our internet connection. I think that's less relevant these days.
Yeah. So as you said, Comcast was interested in Time Warner Cable and offered $45 billion for it. Federal regulators said, no, you can't do that. So what are they likely to say this time?
People so far, again, it's early days, but people are broadly of the belief that this deal, in contrast to the Comcast deal, is going to get done. The reason why is that if Comcast had acquired Time Warner Cable, that would have been the number one provider buying the number two provider. As you said at the start of the show, Charter is a smaller fish. This is really going to be the establishment of a stronger number two rather than the combination of number one and number two.
Okay, so they're likely to say, okay, we'll let you be a big number two, but just as long as you don't become number one?
Well,
even
it's
though
hard
you're
to know.
gargantuan anyway?
Hard to know if they'll ever achieve the scale that would allow them to eclipse Comcast. But broadly, I think regulators, and I think Tom Wheeler even said this, they are willing to allow some deals to get through. They just don't want to see too much control of the broadband market in any one company's hands.
Yeah, and I guess they're looking at net neutrality, right? They're worried about that?
That's a big part of it.
So what has Malone said about that, and where is he on that?
Well, very little, frankly, and this is one of the interesting things. In the investor call today, Malone was not on the call. In the press release announcing the deals, John Malone's name was never mentioned. He really is operating behind the scenes here. He's not the chairman of the board of Charter. He's not even the CEO. But his fingerprints are all over this deal. So it's a bit of an irony here. The guy who's really at the center of this is doing everything in his power to shy away from the limelight.
Yeah. Why? Because he's afraid of negative attention?
I don't know if it's that, but if you talk to people who have known him and observed him over the years, this is just his character. People describe someone who's very patient, who's thinking 5 years out, 10 years out, rather than 5 or 10 months out, and someone who doesn't need the limelight himself, but is very content to kind of pull strings from behind the scenes.
He also, as I said in the intro, he's the largest private landowner, I should say, in the United States.
He is, and it was just, I believe, in 2011 that he achieved that title, taking it from his friend and fellow media mogul, Ted Turner.
And I also read, I think in one of your articles, that his company doesn't really pay much in corporate tax.
He is a master at avoiding taxes. It's something he and his lieutenants take great delight in, it seems. And yet they're very good at it, and they seem to do it entirely legally. So I don't know if you can begrudge someone for paying the minimum amount of taxes that they are legally owed.
So how does he do that? He buys something and then sells something and does it as an exchange to avoid the taxes, the capital gains?
An extraordinary roster of sometimes very complicated maneuvers. But the one that perhaps got the most recent attention was Liberty Global, this company I mentioned, which owns a whole swath of European telecommunications companies. When they acquired Virgin Media just a couple years ago, they performed an inversion, which, if you remember, were getting a lot of attention last year. This is when an American company buys an overseas competitor and reincorporates into a European domicile for the most part to get lower taxes. He did it almost before all these other big pharmaceutical companies we were hearing about last year did it.
Okay, so I guess if I'm listening to this, what does this mean for my internet service here?
Perhaps very little. I mean, these things do take time. These are capital-intensive businesses that require a lot of investment to make things any better. Time Warner Cable doesn't have great customer service. I'm not sure that Charter does. No one really loves their cable guys. So in the near term, besides perhaps getting some Dodgers games for Charter customers, I don't know that there's going to be a big long-term change. What they're saying is that give us a few years and we're going to make your internet faster, we're going to make the user interface better, and we're going to bring you more content for lower prices. I'll believe it when I see it.
David Gellis of the New York Times, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And John Malone is also behind another company grabbing headlines, Discovery Communications, the cable operator behind Shark Week, amongst others. The Associated Press today released a list of last year's 10 highest paid CEOs, and Discovery CEO David Zaslav comes out as number one, pulling in around $156 million last year. In fact, 6 of the 10 highest paid executives were heads of media companies like Leslie Moonves at CBS, Bob Iger at Disney. 2014 marks the 5th year in a row that CEO pay has gone up. And for more, we're joined by Steve Rothwell. He's a business writer covering this for the AP. Hi.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. David Zaslav, head of Discovery, $156 million last year. Why so much?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, he's been in charge of the company since 2007, during which time they've performed reasonably well. And this year he renewed his contract, extended it for a few more years, so I guess they were keen to have him. That obviously shows up in his pay awards because they give him a lot of stock awards, which may or may not make him a lot of money depending on how the company does over the next few years. But those awards show up in this year's statement.
I see. So it's not necessarily his base pay. It's bonuses and stock options.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of these guys, a lot of their pay is linked to performance, and a very small portion actually comes from a sort of guaranteed base salary.
Well, so why are 6 out of the 10 highest paid CEOs in media companies? Why is that so lucrative?
There's a number of factors. I mean, one of the factors is there's a couple of these guys. I mean, just your previous discussion there with Charter and Time Warner and John Malone. I mean, he's one of the guys behind Discovery. At CBS and Viacom, it's the same guy, Sumner Redstone. If there's only one person there, basically these CEOs only are really answerable to one person rather than a whole range of investors. So to a degree, if that one person is happy and they're going to get paid well, there's not really going to be much discussion. And there are some other factors, like if you look at Disney, for example, I mean, their stock price has done very well. Bob Iger's made some great deals. A very canny acquisition of Marvel, which you see with the Age of Ultron. That film was out this year. And obviously the Lucasfilm acquisition for Star Wars. So he's made some very good deals. The stock price has gone up a lot. That's another factor. And obviously the third thing is when pay is being set by these companies, they look at what the other guys in the industry are getting paid. The idea being that, well, if the guy at the company next door is getting paid more in this industry, our guy might jump ship and join them. So it's kind of a vicious circle or a virtuous circle, depending on which way you look at it, where they're all going to get paid more or less in the same ballpark.
So then that would maybe contradict the idea that they would jump ship to another company if they're all paying the same amount.
Well, indeed. I mean, I spoke to a corporate governance expert at the University of Delaware, Charles Elson, when I was doing the research for this piece, and he said empirically there's actually very little evidence of CEOs jumping from one company to the next, and companies should, instead of like benchmarking their pay against their peers in the industry, they should just look more internally and see how pay is there and how it reflects across the company rather than looking outside and worrying about their CEO jumping ship.
Well, how closely indexed are CEO pays to the health and wealth of the company?
Well, that's let's say that's a subject for debate. I mean, at the minute, the economy is in a sort of slow expansion. As you know, the stock indexes have been rising quite steadily since 2009, since we came out of a recession. So, I mean, these guys do get paid based on performance of the share prices. So the share price is going up. I guess the question for debate is how much of that is down to the CEO and how much is down to external factors such as performance of the economy and what's happening in the broader capital markets.
Right. Well, what happened to the idea tossed around during the financial collapse of tying CEO pay more closely to worker pay?
I think a lot of companies objected to this, not unsurprisingly perhaps, but they make a point that it can be a little bit difficult in the sense that it's different for every company. For example, if you have a company that has like a lot of overseas workers, say they outsource a call center to India, or maybe someone like McDonald's where you have lower paid service workers, that would totally distort. So it's very hard to give a one-size-fits-all solution.
Now, there's one woman on the list, Marissa Mayer of Yahoo. And in general, how are women doing in terms of their pay?
Well, it would appear that women CEOs actually got better pay rises than their male counterparts. But the list is still very, very small in comparison to men. I think there's 17 with female CEOs on our list, which comprised about 240. So it's a very small sample still.
So is anyone trying to rein in CEO pay?
Really
certainly not the CEOs, I guess.
But, well, not the CEOs. I mean, I would say that perhaps there are people out there, investors, who say they keep a close eye on it. I think with investors generally, if the stock price is going up, they're generally happy with it. I think the question will come not now when the prices are going up, everyone's happy. It's more what happens in a downturn when stock prices start to fall. Are these guys still going to be taking home these big pay packages? And I think that's when this topic might start to come back to the surface again.
Steve Rothwell, business writer for the Associated Press. Thanks for joining us.
All right, thanks for having me.
All right, press players, what do you think about these gigantic salaries? Should there be a cap on CEO pay, or is this just the American way, a reward that they should get? Let us know your thoughts at 1-844-PRESS-PLAY, or you can tweet us at KCRW Press Play. Coming up on the program, the other end of the financial ladder, the penny saver. It abruptly went out of business over the weekend. We're going to find out more next on Press Play.
Take KCRW with you on one of our smartphone apps. Available for the iPhone, Android, and BlackBerry. You can stream KCRW live, listen to podcasts, and all our news and music streams. Learn more and download at kcrw.com/apps.
This is Press Play. I'm Madeline Brand. Devastating news for coupon clippers. The owners of the Penny Saver announced over the weekend it would cease to exist. For more than 50 years, the Penny Saver arrived in mailboxes throughout California with pages full of discounts at local retailers. The paper started out in 1962 in Huntington Beach and spread across the state. According to their website, the print edition reached more than 9 million Californians a week. The Penny Saver was sold 2 years ago for more than $22 million, but the new owners say they had run out of money. Well, it's certainly not the end of discounts, but it may be the end of an era. Ira Kolb is assistant professor of clinical marketing at USC's Marshall School of Business. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Madeline. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, my pleasure. And were you surprised to hear that the Penny Saver was still around?
I wasn't surprised to hear that it was still around. I'm kind of surprised they just abruptly went out of business, though.
Yeah, because they had just gotten all that money from their sale.
Well, the company that bought them is a financial company, and they're known to be kind of cutthroat when they decide to shut things down.
Oh, okay. Well, so what's behind it? Is it because they didn't embrace the digital world?
That's part of it. I think most people are migrating to the digital world, and when you look at the data, the redemption rate of online coupons and on-package coupons is so much higher than the redemption rate of coupons that people have to clip out of newspapers and magazines.
Who are the coupon clippers? Who still do that?
Well, stereotypically, the coupon clippers are the mothers of families that are trying to save money, especially in recessionary times, but even in other times. And, of course, you have the wealthy people that don't value their time, and they have fun just trying to save some money. Because you'll find a lot of the people going into discount stores are driving Mercedes-Benzes as well.
Well, why didn't the Penny Saver embrace digital? Why didn't they just put their stuff online?
Well, you know, it's hard. People get in the habit of doing things the way they've always done it, and they don't pay attention to the marketplace signals because they don't have a good system. And so they assume it's always going to be the way it was in the past, and that's not the case anymore. Things are changing rapidly.
And what does this mean for businesses that rely on people using the Penny Saver?
Well, those businesses really have to find out where their customers and prospects are going to get their information. And if they're not going to the Penny Saver anymore, they really need to investigate where they're going. A lot of them are going online, but some people aren't online, and they have to find other ways to find them. So
what kinds of businesses relied on the Penny Saver and other physical coupons?
Well, since it was mainly in California, were California businesses that were local that didn't have the money or either didn't want to have the money or didn't want to spend it on advertising, because the Penny Saver was an inexpensive way to advertise your services and get people to, try your business or try your product.
Yeah. Well, how big a deal are coupons in terms of retail sales?
Well, coupons are a huge deal. There were 315 billion coupons issued in 2013. That's the latest real data we have. And about 2.8 billion were redeemed, which is not a very high rate. That's about 0.8%. But it's a big deal because there are two things that a coupon does for you. It gives you a small ad. It advertises the product or the company, and it also gives people an incentive to buy by the expiration date on the coupon.
Well, do we know how effective that form of advertising is?
Yeah, we do if we measure. A lot of people, the problem in marketing is a lot of people spend money on advertising and coupons and all sorts of marketing, but they don't measure. And so we really don't know until we go out and measure. For example, I teach my students and I tell my clients that they should code everything, and that way when you get a response, you know where it came from.
Well, but how would you do that if someone gets a coupon and say online in their email, in their inbox, they see it, they don't redeem it? How do you know that they are actually remembering that business and then going to it later?
Well, you'd have to do a survey in that case. If you coded the coupon when they respond and they go either online or offline, you'll pick up the code and you'll know where it came from. But if you're asking me what's the advertising effect, we really only know that by surveying people and actually asking them or watching their behavior.
Well, we just went through an election. A few people voted in it. So we got a lot of political mailers if we lived in certain districts. But are businesses still investing in direct mail the same way that candidates are?
Yes, they are, because there are people that look at the direct mail and respond to it. And the average response rate to direct mail in general is about 1%. So it's a numbers game. And, of course, if you do better content and you use other incentives to get people to respond, you can get that number up. In fact, if you bundle a personalized gift with your direct mail piece, you can get response rates 7,500 to 8,000% increase.
Really? Does it have to be a big gift, or can it be a...
No, it doesn't have to be a big gift. It has to be personalized, though. So it has to have the initials or name of the person on it. And it should be related to your business. For example, if I was a builder, I might make a woodblock paperweight with the initials or the name of the person I'm sending it to carved in the paperweight. So if it's personalized, it's going to get a 75 to 80% response rate.
That sounds like it would cost a lot, though.
It could, but you have to look in business at the return on investment. If you look at the return on investment for such a high response rate, you'll typically find you get a good one.
Are there digital retailers that have gone analog and tried old-fashioned direct mail?
Yes, as a matter of fact, one that you probably would never guess is Google. Google uses direct mail to promote new services and offer coupons for their AdWords product.
Really? Why would it do that?
Well, I think that they probably did some research and found out that some of their audience that they're not reaching online, they can get through offline methods. And that's usually why most people go offline. In fact, the big trend now is to have both, is to have retail stores and an online store. And the companies that have both tend to do better. For example, Apple or Macy's or Target or Walmart even, they have both online and offline.
What about catalogs? It seems like they are still a big part of direct mail, but it does seem surprising given the cost of paper and given the production values of some of these catalogs. Yeah,
catalogs are still big, but they're declining just like all other forms of print because they're very expensive to print. A lot of companies that are successful with catalogs, they only print them a certain number of times a year, some only once a year. And that's sort of their store in a book form. That's what a catalog is. It's what we call a store in a book. So it's, even though it's expensive to print, it's less expensive than having a physical place of business and paying the rent.
But are businesses in danger of oversaturation? I mean, we are not only getting catalogs in the mail and pieces of direct marketing and advertising, but also online. We are awash in advertising.
That's an excellent question, and the answer is yes, there is oversaturation. The average human brain is bombarded with 20,000 ad messages a week from all sources. So most of our brains are tuning out most of those messages. That's why if you want to be successful in promotion these days, you have to really put extra effort into creating good content that your target audience wants to see. And I have to say, from my point of view, and we analyze these in my classes, the content's not good enough. It doesn't work very effectively.
And I guess it didn't work effectively for the penny saver.
No, it didn't. Well, as I said, they were stuck in a groove and a habit of doing things the old way, and the world changed on them. You always have to add value and you have to keep in touch with what's going on in the marketplace, and they apparently didn't do that.
Yeah. I remember green stamps. Now that was...
Oh, absolutely.
That was fun.
And there were blue chip stamps on the West Coast, too.
Yeah.
Do you remember those?
I do. It was really fun, licking them and putting them in your book and everything.
That's the part of it. Some people clip coupons because they find it fun. It's like money. You're finding money in these books. So, it can be a lot of fun.
Okay. Ira Kalb, Assistant Professor of Clinical Marketing at USC's Marshall School of Business. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, are you a coupon clipper? Are you a Groupon user? What's the best deal you ever got? Leave us a message at 1-844-PRESS-PLAY, and we may use your comment at the end of today's show. Coming up on the program, jazz is back in the form of Kamasi Washington. He's a composer and a tenor sax player. He's played with Kendrick Lamar, Snoop Dogg, and many others, but he's rooted in old school jazz. He's going to talk about his South LA influences after a news update with Eric Roy.
Listen to KCRW's 24-hour all-news channel. Stream BBC World Service, NPR, and KCRW programs. Continuous coverage and accessible via our smartphone app or online at kcrw.com.
This is Press Play. I'm Madeline Brand. New jazz records don't normally make a lot of news in today's music world, but local tenor sax player and composer Kamasi Washington is bucking that trend. His latest album is called, appropriately, The Epic. It's a 3-CD set featuring dozens of musicians and singers performing almost 3 hours of music. And here's a little of the album's closing track. It's called The Message. That's Kamasi Washington on the tenor sax there on The Message from his new album, The Epic. And you can hear Kamasi Washington on Kendrick Lamar's new album, To Pimp a Butterfly. He's also played with Snoop Dogg, Lauryn Hill, and Flying Lotus. And Kamasi Washington, welcome to Press Play.
Thanks for having me.
That was wild, that tenor sax playing right there.
Oh, yeah.
How long does that go on?
Oh, it goes on for a few little minutes.
And who's playing drums?
That's 2 drummers, actually. That's Ronald Bruner and Tony Austin, and a percussion player, Leon Mobley. So there's a lot of percussion happening right there.
Yeah, and you have 10 members in your group?
Yeah, in the band. Yeah, there's 10 members in the band.
10 members in the band. But on this album, you have many more.
Yeah. It's like the credit list was like a 14-page document. It was like it's a little mini book.
So how did you collect all these musicians and get them to play on your album?
It's amazing. We all grew up together, like literally, like since we were like kids, like before music. Like I met Ronald Bruner and Stephen Bruner when I was 3 years old. My dad told me the story. Like I was my 3rd birthday party, and Ronald's a little younger than me, like maybe like a year and a half, and I got a drum set for my birthday, and Ronald was like 1 and he can already play the drums, and so like he was playing the drums, and apparently I was mad because they were letting the baby play my drums, and I was like, why are you letting that baby play my drums? Because he was like a baby to me. He was still in diapers at the
And he couldn't even talk.
He couldn't talk, but he could play drums already. Like Ronald's been dope since he was like 9. He's like he was playing drums in the womb, I think. Yeah.
So all your friends played jazz growing up?
Yeah,
or a lot of them did?
Well, so Ronald and Stephen, who I met first, and then they went to elementary school with Brandon Coleman and Tony Austin, and that's how I met them. And then I met Ryan Porter in junior high school in Jazz America, and I met Miles and Cameron in high school. So we were all playing music and jazz and everything else.
And you went to Hamilton High?
Yeah, I
in
went
the
to
music
Hamilton.
department.
The Music Academy.
But this is in the 80s and the 90s. You grew up here. In South LA.
Yeah, South Central. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Would it be safe to say that most kids your age at that time were listening to hip hop in the 80s
Oh,
and 90s?
absolutely. Yeah, even me too. Jazz. I really got into jazz, even though my dad's a musician and it was in the house all the time. I didn't really gravitate to jazz for myself until I was about 11. I remember I was like 5th grade or something like that.
And what turned you onto it? Why did you want?
I had a cousin that I really kind of looked up to, and he had this mixtape that he made of Art Blakey and Lee Morgan songs. And he was kind of like, we were both in the NWA and stuff like that too. So I just associated it with, I was like, oh man, Art Blakey is gangster. I got into it. I started telling all my friends too. So we had this little clique of people at my elementary school that were into Art Blakey.
Your parents were both musicians.
My dad's a professional musician. My mom plays flute for fun. She's more of she's a science teacher. So my dad was a music teacher and my mom was a science teacher.
And did they introduce you to jazz?
Yeah. It was funny. Like my dad, when I was really young, he would show me all these records and then it didn't really catch until I got that tape. And then it was funny. I would always go back to him like, have you ever heard this record? And he's like, Kamasi, I showed you that record 8 years ago when you were 5. And I'm like, well, have you heard Kind of Blue? Well, have you heard A Love Supreme?
Well, did you know when you were growing up that you were a part of and would be a part of the jazz history of Los Angeles, West Coast jazz? I mean, it's
wow.
Central Avenue. And
that's still sinking in for me, actually.
Really?
I mean, well, growing up,
because this is where Dexter Gordon played and Max Roach and Stan Getz.
Yeah,
all part of this West Coast jazz scene.
I mean, music has always been so close to me. Like, I grew up around, my dad's and his friends are all really brilliant. And so a lot of the L.A. jazz musicians, I knew them before I played music, And then, so for me, I guess in some way I always felt like a part of it, but to be a part of it, where they respect me, on the level, it's kind of it's still a little surreal, But once my friends and I, we all grew up together, there was a certain point we got to where I started to realize that we were making some really beautiful music.
If you're just joining me, I'm speaking with tenor sax player and composer Kamasi Washington. He has a new album out. It's called The Epic. How do you think of your music as different from East Coast jazz or New York jazz?
I mean, the ironic thing is that in LA and in the West Coast in general, the world of jazz and the world of music in general has kind of overlooked us. So it's like a gift and a curse. The curse of it is that a lot of musicians that are great musicians have lived their lives in obscurity. But the gift of it is that, to me, West Coast jazz is uninhibited and it's uninfluenced. So the musicians that I find in LA that are really doing something exciting, they're doing it on their own terms completely. No one is pushing them one way or the other. When I go to New York, they're more specialized because there's a pressure to be specialized. Here in LA, it's you just play the music you play. It doesn't have to fit into a genre or a space. It doesn't. There's no rules. That's what's exciting people. That's why Kendrick Lamar can make a record like he does and break all these rules. And same thing with me. I just break the rules.
So when you talk about breaking the rules in jazz, what does that look like? Because, I don't know, I think as a fan of jazz, I think of jazz as just, that's what it is breaking the rules.
Absolutely. I feel the same way. I think that the lineage of jazz is so big now. And jazz musicians and the society of jazz has suffered from a bit of a destructive level of humility, where we revere what came before so much that we diminish what we're doing now. And there's this sense of like inferiority, like no one likes us, unless you're doing something that sounds like what people were doing in 1965 at the latest. There's a pressure in jazz to prove that you can play bebop, or prove that you can play modal jazz, or prove that you listen to Lester Young and all these people. And by the time you've done proving that you have a mastery of this lineage, there's only a little bit of space left for you to do what you do. So I took the opposite approach. I'm like, I'm not going to prove that I know how to do anything. I'm going to just play like I play. And I'm going to let all my band members just play the way you play. And whatever's in there is what's in there. And whatever's not in there is not in there. And I think what happened is that people are getting a larger chunk of individuality, but they're also getting the lineage because the lineage lives in me. I don't have to try to show it. It's just in there. I couldn't get it out of me if I wanted. It's almost like, you're influenced by the ideas that have happened to you before in history, but if I had to prove a mastery of every great figure in history in every conversation I had, you wouldn't get too many of my thoughts. If I had to show I know what Abraham Lincoln thought, and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and all these other people, I have to prove that every time I said something, you wouldn't get too many of my ideas. But the fact of the matter is those ideas are already in my mind because I grew up hearing them, listening to them, so they affected who I am. Approach that like we are as relevant as any musician ever, and my band members are my favorite musicians of all time. Like Ronald Bruner to me is as relevant as Tony Williams, and Brandon Coleman is as relevant as Herbie Hancock. I wouldn't trade them for the jazz greats. I wouldn't. Like I love them. I treat them like they are the greats because what we're doing now is relevant to the people. People need what we're doing, because what we're doing has attached to it the problems and issues of the society that we live in. The things that people need to be healed of now are not the same thing they need to be healed of in 1965. So,
do you see your music as filling that role as a healing role?
Absolutely, yeah.
So something more than just entertainment.
Absolutely, yeah. To me, because like music saved my life. Like growing up in South Central, like I could say, like before I got that tape, I was headed down to a different kind of path. I was
what
going
kind of path?
I was a little gangster. I thought I was going to be this. I thought I was going to be the hardest dude on the block and all this. Every other word was cuz, and that was just what I was doing. And then when two things happened, my cousin gave me that tape, and there was a program called Ujima that came to my school that kind of teach young African American men their history and their culture. And they gave me a copy of the autobiography of Malcolm X and a copy of the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. And reading those books and listening to that music, it took away the pain of where I was, which opened my eyes to where I could go and where I could be and what I could do.
Speaking of breaking all the rules, you did a couple covers on this. One of them is of a classical piece by Debussy called Clair de Lune.
Yeah.
A classical piece. Let's just take a listen to that. this album 3 CDs worth of music.
Yeah.
Why so epic, if you will? Why so much in one?
Well, I ended up with 45 songs to choose from. It took me about 6-7 months, but I actually, just through the process of elimination, shrunk the 45 songs down to 17 that I really felt like embodied my vision for those songs. So for those months of choosing the songs, I was listening to the music all the time. And then when I started writing to them, I was really listening to it, and I wasn't sleeping because I was doing a lot of other stuff. And I don't know, it kind of crept into my subconscious, and I started having this. Well, I was working on this song called Change of the Guard. And Change of the Guard, I started having this dream about Change of the Guard. And it was this crazy dream of this guy on a mountaintop guarding a gate, and the village people, and they were challenging the guard. It was really, really crazy and like almost like a movie. And so I kind of got obsessed with the dream. So I started like trying to force the dream. Yeah, I don't know if you ever tried to do that, but I would go to sleep replaying it to make it happen so I can like wake up in the morning, and as soon as I wake up, write it down because I kept forgetting what it was kind of. And so like while I was writing it, I started writing out this story, and the story started kind of interweaving with all 17 songs. And by the time I really got the story all the way down, it had every song in it. And I was like, something's telling me to make all these songs the album. I have to just listen to it. So that's how it ended up being this big, ginormous thing.
Wow. Would you ever want to play with the Los Angeles Philharmonic?
Oh, that would be beautiful.
Yeah.
That would be amazing. Absolutely.
Maybe that'll happen.
Yeah.
So let's go out on Changing of the Guard.
Awesome.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is
My
so
pleasure.
Cool.
It was really fun. Kamasi Washington. His new 3 CD album is called The Epic, and you can hear him this Thursday at the Blue Whale in Little Tokyo, and also at the Playboy Jazz Fest at the Hollywood Bowl on June 13th. All right. She's wailing on the mic. Barbara Bogave.
That was such a nice conversation. Thank
He's
you.
great. He's fantastic. I love him.
Well, coming up on To the Point, with a lot of music. We have a
doing 1 hour on jazz.
No, not exactly. We're talking about the key provisions of the Patriot Act, which are set to expire June 1st if the Senate does not follow the House in coming to an agreement on whether to reform them or let the National Security Program with its mass data, bulk data, metadata collection, very controversial program, to let that lapse.
Now, this is something that I think Mitch McConnell thought would just go through easily, and then
and then Rand Paul ranted for about 11 hours, and now they're in a real tussle over that, and they're very divided. And it's interesting because it doesn't fall along partisan lines necessarily, this issue, and certainly not among the American public along partisan lines.
And does it look like there will be significant changes?
Well, the House wants to reform these parts of the Patriot Act, especially the bulk telephone collection. The Senate just hasn't quite figured it out yet.
Okay. Well, we'll find out a lot more in the next hour of To the Point.
We certainly will.
With Barbara Bogave sitting in for Warren Alney this whole week.
Yes.
So, yay.
Nice
Welcome.
to be here. Thanks.
Nice to have you. And coming up on this program, Los Angeles is on the ocean. So why aren't we a seafood town? That's changing, and we'll tell you about some great new seafood restaurants next on Press Play.
This podcast is produced by KCRW, a nonprofit public radio station based in Santa Monica. KCRW is listener supported. Help us continue to create and distribute our unique content. Go to kcrw.com/join to donate. And thanks.
This is Press Play. I'm Madeline Brand. Cities by the sea are generally known for a few things: beaches, fresh ocean air, seafood. Well, for Los Angeles, 2 out of 3. Unlike Seattle, Boston, or San Francisco, LA is not known as a seafood town. Sure, we have sushi and fish tacos, but by and large, it's not the food that put us on the map. Why not? And is it finally changing? Catherine Spires is food editor at KCT, and she's here to help get to the bottom of this.
Yes, I am.
The bottom of the sea.
Right.
Well, we are not a seafood town now. Have we ever been?
No, there's been canneries in the San Pedro area, but those were all seafood that was being shipped out to other places. There's been a couple fishes, local fishes that we've eaten. There's abalone. There's some swordfish from Catalina, but people don't really think of that when they think of seafood. I mean, so, yeah.
But why don't we have these hot seafood restaurants along the beach? Like, why don't we have them? Why? I must know.
It's such a mystery because, yes, in other towns, seafood is something that you can get very easily, whether it's like the Beach Shack that you mentioned or, dozens of seafood palaces in cities like Boston or Seattle. There's some theories as to why this might be, but people disagree on this. Mark Gold, he's the former president of Heal the Bay, and now he's at the UCLA Institute of the Environment and Sustainability. He thinks that pollution in the Santa Monica Bay, it makes us think that water is dirty as Angelinos. Whether or not our seafood actually is local, when we know that, like, on certain days you can't swim in the water, why would we eat fish from the water? That's just like an association people have. However, his brother, the food critic Jonathan Gold, he disagrees. He thinks that all water is disgusting, so why Santa Monica Bay in particular? So, people have different theories as to why it is.
Yeah. Well, there's Ted and Connie's. That's one popular seafood restaurant.
Yeah, Ted and Connie's, that's a pretty new one. And they do a little bit more of like an East Coast thing. They have like clam cakes, which, sure, why not?
Why not?
That's more of an East Coast specialty. That's the type of seafood they're doing. One thing that might be happening is that generally overall, food consumers are becoming a lot more savvy about food issues. So while there is this emphasis on local, we're also starting to just sort of understand that any seafood that we eat in Los Angeles is not local. And so it's okay to eat because wherever it came from, it's probably a clean source. And people used to think that previously frozen fish was some sort of mark of a cheap restaurant. It's not. Any fish you get in Los Angeles has probably been frozen at an earlier point. So that's fine. You can go to a classy place and they can have frozen food, and that doesn't mean that they're trying to rip you off or anything.
Right. I mean, Providence, Michael Simorsi, he gets fish flown in from Japan.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when we're talking about seafood in Los Angeles, we're talking about fish that came from very, very far away, and that's fine. It tends to make it a lot more expensive, but seafood is already considered expensive, so...
So we're not considered a seafood town, and yet we're considered a sushi town.
Yeah, there is this one thread for all the ways in which Los Angeles is not a seafood town. We like raw fish. Sushi became popularized in America I think in Los Angeles first. All the sushi joints along Ventura Boulevard that opened up in the late 80s and early 90s, they made Los Angeles a city of sushi eaters. And then in the early 80s, the restaurant Chaya, they can reasonably say that they sort of invented tuna tartare. And tuna tartare is just raw tuna with some sauce on it, so it's not... it's not like some moment that one person can say, I'm the first person who ever did this. However, they do have this very famous story of a group of customers came in and beef tartare was on the menu. They didn't want to eat beef, so the chef had to come up with something on the fly. And voila, tuna tartare.
Really?
Yeah.
Just like that?
Yeah. So we get to claim credit for that also.
And the California roll.
And the California roll, of course, which... do we want to take credit for that? I don't know.
I'm going to say yes, we do.
Okay.
As long as it has real crab in it.
That's so key. Yeah, they never do. Well, some places do, yeah. The California roll. There's that, and then lately, the one thing that might turn LA into a seafood town, it might happen, is Hawaiian poke, which, again, raw fish. We're into it. It's sort of similar to tartare, but it's a down-home dish from Hawaii. It's chopped up tuna, usually with some soy sauce, some sesame oil, some onions, maybe some other accoutrements. I don't know. Again, I wish I had more answers. I can't explain to you why in the past few months, I'm not exaggerating, dozens of poke shops have opened up.
Dozens?
Dozens, yeah. Around the whole
and
county.
Are they coming from Hawaii?
Some of them are. Some of them are coming from other places in the country. Some of them are homegrown. It's this confluence of poke. I don't know. I mean, sure, why not? But I don't know why all of a sudden maybe we got bored of sushi and we need a new way of ingesting raw fish. Maybe that's what it is.
Also, I've noticed several lobster shack joints.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lobster rolls are definitely having a moment as well. That one, I don't think it can be as sustainable as poke, because poke is meant to be a relatively inexpensive food. Lobster rolls on the West Coast are not. Whereas on the East Coast, particularly in Maine, you can get lobster rolls at McDonald's. I mean, they're everyday food. But since...
Well, you can get a fillet of fish here, so...
Right. That's our elegant McDonald's contribution.
It's French.
Right. Yeah, the lobster roll places in Los Angeles are very, very expensive. And can we just be honest? Lobster is not good.
Lobster?
Yeah, I don't.
Oh, I disagree.
It doesn't taste like anything.
It's delicious. It's sweet. It's meaty.
All right.
Put some melted butter on it.
See, that's the key. People just want the butter delivery system.
It's like popcorn.
Right.
The popcorn of fish.
Yes. Yeah. So lobster, tuna, that might make Los Angeles finally a seafood city for the first time ever. Yeah.
Well, good.
Thing. I know. Yeah.
It's summer. It's time to eat some fish.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good time of the year for it.
Catherine Spires, she's food editor at KCET. Christian Bordahl is here, sitting in for Julie Myers.
Hey there, Madeline.
Hi. Lobster, yay or nay?
Lobster, absolutely. I'm a big lobster fan. Yes.
2 votes here for lobster. Maybe it's because it's lunchtime. I don't know. Anyway.
Well, in the mailbag today, early on the program, we talked about CEO pay. And despite Dodd-Frank and the effort to rein it in, all that talk about capping CEO pay didn't happen. CEOs are being paid more than ever. We talked about David Zaslav, CEO of Discovery, responsible for classic shows like Shark Week and Deadliest Catch.
Got to be worth tons of money.
Got to be worth tons of money.
Speaking of seafood.
$156 million a year, maybe. So Scott Frank says that's equivalent to $75,000 an hour if you're working a 40-hour week. That's pretty good. That's better than you, I think, Madeline, even.
Maybe by a couple of zeros.
R. Salermo says, overpaid for the value he has brought to the organization. And B. Fritsch says, no one's worth that much. So, as you might expect, not a lot of CEO love out there.
I think we need a show on sharks here on KCRW.
We do need a show on
sharks. Bump up my pay.
Yes. Or maybe we need more CEOs responding to our tweets and Facebook messages and that kind of stuff. Then maybe we could balance it out and get some more CEO love. By the way, we asked people to give us some seafood restaurant suggestions on our Twitter and Facebook page at KCRW Press Play, so check that out.
Okay, great. And if you want to weigh in on anything else you've heard, at KCRW Press Play is our Twitter, Facebook, KCRW Press Play. Christian Bordahl, thank you for joining us.
Yes, indeed.
Sitting in for Julie Myers. And speaking of sitting in, Barbara Bogave, sitting in for Warren Alney, coming up at 1 o'clock. I'm Madeline Brand. Have a great afternoon. I'll see you tomorrow.